All right, ladies, gentlemen, and everything in between. Figured we'd do a scope mount video for you guys. We're gonna do it on a Remington 700 two-piece base, and we're gonna do this because I think it's a very common setup, and it's also a little trickier and a little more intricate than just your standard tactical one-piece base that most people run. And all those same principles are gonna apply, so if you can do this, you can do this on your tactical rifle. Let's just go over the tools that we're gonna need really quick to get this done. We're gonna need a small flat blade screwdriver to remove the filler screws in our action. We're gonna need the Torx or Allen, whatever system you're running, make sure you're using the correct size. We're gonna need a reticle leveling tool of some sort. Actually, you don't need it. I had some workarounds here that I'm gonna explain, but these will help you out. A machinist level, again, not required, but it's gonna help. Torque wrench, definitely a good idea. We have a Seconic here, very accurate. We use it in the shop here all the time. If you're looking for something that, if you haven't purchased a torque wrench already and you're looking for something to go in your kit as well as something that works in the shop, Fix-It sticks are awesome. They've also got a breakdown on their website of all the different torque specs for all the different rings and rails. Not quite as accurate as the Seconic here, but they do a great job. My military and law enforcement guys, you guys will probably recognize this. This is also a Seconic, but this is a fixed torque spec at 65 inch-pounds, which is gonna work on your technical rings with your 1/2-inch nut, but you certainly do not wanna use this to torque your base or your rings. Moving along, we've got acetone to clean our threads. We need some Q-tips, and we've got thread locker, of course, to lock everything down. That's pretty much it. That's all we need to get going anyways. Without further ado, let's get into it. I'm Trent Griswold. My shooting career started at a young age, thanks to my dad, who's a Marine and 40-year law enforcement veteran. I've done just about everything in the shooting industry. Competition, instruction, consulting, you name it. It's been a wild ride. In 2009, I graduated with my degrees in gunsmithing and opened up shop to build long-range precision rifles with my brother. Come on in and take a look at some of our latest projects and adventures. Make sure this thing is unloaded. Looking good. Got our optic. Remington 700, 308. Loopholed optic, loopholed two-piece base, and rings. Pretty much your standard, inexpensive but good quality deer setup here. So first things first, we're gonna go ahead and just pop these filler screws out. Make sure you get the right size bit for these. A lot of these will come in the shop, and people have attempted to remove these with a screwdriver that's too large. Most screwdriver sets don't have this size, so go out and buy the right size because you will booger these up. They will get stuck and they are expensive to remove. One of those nice little eyeglass sets might work for this too. They're not torqued in there too tight. Also hang on to these guys because if you do Cerakote work or coating or anything like that, it's really nice to fill these holes with those. First things first, before we even really get started here, you would want to inspect everything and make sure you've got the right setup. Make sure that the optic is gonna clear the bolt handle and you got enough clearance height-wise for the objective over the barrel and all that stuff. I've done this particular setup many, many times, so I know that this is all gonna work. So I'm not gonna waste your time doing that, but you definitely would wanna mock all this stuff up first before you get going on that. I'm gonna get right into installing this base, again, to save some time. But if you weren't sure, or this is all new stuff to you, you would, like I said, you'd wanna mock this up. Manufacturer states that we do not need Loctite on these base screws. I'm not gonna disagree with them, but I'm going to clean, degrease, and put some blue Loctite on these base screws. It's cheap insurance. It's not something that you can easily check when you're going over the rifle because they're not exposed, so you can't just make sure that these are tight. It sucks for a guy to lose an animal or ruin a hunt because his base is loose, or not be able to zero the rifle properly, or not hold a zero. So cheap insurance on all my tactical rifles. I even use red Loctite, which is high strength or permanent Loctite. Don't do that if you're not willing to use heat to remove those screws though, so just a note there, but that's how I do it on my personal rifles. Here we go. Clean these things up and we'll get this base mounted. A little bit of acetone here. Now I'm not going to degrease the entire screw because I don't want them to rust. I'm just degreasing the threads. This is pretty important here as well, guys. Let me just put the right bit on here. When it comes to this front screw, this very front screw, this is a blind hole because the barrel runs into the receiver here. The rest of these are through holes. They go all the way through the action. A lot of times what will happen when people are mounting their bases, this goes for any base, one-piece base or two-piece base, anything that uses this front screw. You'll also notice out of these 4 screws, I picked the shorter of the 2. A lot of times what will happen, that front screw will be too long, either the wrong screw or just too long in general, and when they go to torque this down, they'll get the proper torque setting, but it's actually bottoming out on the barrel and you'll still have a loose base. So they torque this down, they go, okay, we're all good, we're torqued, and now they're only relying on one screw here to hold this thing in place. So go all the way down, make sure that you are in fact bottoming out on the base and that shoulder is working the way it should. And I'm not going to go all the way down just yet. Many people will apply blue Loctite to these screws and then they'll put this base on here and they'll torque it down. Anytime you are putting 2 pieces of material together that you want to make perfect contact, like the base and this action here, you want to avoid spillage in between those 2 surfaces. So I very carefully apply Loctite to the action itself, not too much. All right, so we've got just enough Loctite in there now, and now when we put this on, we're not going to have an overflow or excessive Loctite in between our base and our action. Let's torque these suckers down. Now, I'm not going tight yet. I'm going to show you something very important also when it comes to mounting really anything on a rifle. We want to make sure that, you can see there's a little bit of movement here. We want to make sure that we're always seating things in the forward-most position. We're putting pressure here before we tighten this down, and that's because of inertia. Under recoil, everything wants to move. The rifle's going to move this way. Because of inertia, this is going to want to stay stationary, and it's always going to end up with force in this direction. So we want to put it there in the first place. If we torque it down and it's kind of neutral, or it's back here, it's going to have a tendency to want to move, and that's going to translate to a zero shift, potentially. So, again, forward. We're just going tight here. We're not going to go to our torque spec just yet. Let's do the same exact thing to the rear. So one of the reasons we want to mock this up right here is that we've got our bases kind of firm but not torqued into place just yet. We've put our rings on and we've tightened them down a little bit. We're going to set our optic in here. And because this is not a one-piece base, there's a little bit of slop essentially in these two-part bases, and these might not be aligned, allowing the optic to sit all the way down. I don't know if you guys can see this in the camera, but there's a gap here. So what we don't want to do is force this thing down in there and clamp this down and mess up the tube on the scope. And it's also just not sitting in the correct orientation. So we're going to pull this rear ring off really quick, and we're going to loosen this base just a kiss. And you can see that movement there. And it was kind of all the way over on this side, so we're going to move it back some. We're going to kind of just fine tune this. And we can do that by doing it this way. Now, they do have a truing bar essentially that you can drop in here and align this. But we can do it with the scope. So I am going to put this base back on. Again, that front screw is loose. Both of them are. You can see it kind of moving around a little bit now. And I'm going to put that optic back in there. And it starts to fit pretty nicely. Much better than previously. Make sure we have full contact all the way down. And we do, but I'm going to move this front one as well. That is much better. So now they're kind of finding their way here. And we got nice full contact on the bottom. So we're going to pull these off very carefully without moving anything. We are going to just torque this one screw down here. Again, making sure that everything's pushed forward. Double check. And now we have nice uniform contact. I'm going to pull our scope rings now. Put a final torque. On our bases. So the torque spec here is 22 inch-pounds. 15, 15, and 22. Okay, we've cleaned and put some Loctite on our rings. We're going to go hand tight here, pushing forward. Anytime we're mounting anything to Picatinny, we're going to be pushing forward. Just go hand tight. Our torque spec here is 45 inch-pounds. Boom. All right, so we've got our bases torqued down. We've got the bottom of our rings torqued down. Make sure that our optic sits in there and sits nice and flush and full contact. And it does. Beautiful. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to throw one of these rings on. I'm going to throw this forward one on. And I'm going to put it in place, but I'm not going to torque it down just yet. And we're going to keep it loose. I'll show you what we're going to do next. All right, so we've got one of our rings on here, and it's hardly tight at all. Loose enough to where I can still move this optic a little bit if I need to. Here's where we are going to set up eye relief, and basically that's just the fore and aft movement of the scope. If you're going to be shooting prone, lay down, get the proper eye relief for prone. If you're going to be shooting at a bench, sit at a bench, get the proper eye relief for that. If you're going to shoot off sticks, offhand. Whatever you're gonna do, make sure that you set up eye relief for that position. And if you're gonna do all of those things, then try all the positions. My point is don't just set it up here at the bench if you're gonna shoot prone. Anyway, so we've got this front ring on and it's loose, and we can still move this optic a little bit. And we've set our eye relief to where we feel comfortable, where the customer feels comfortable. If he's here, then that's ideal, or she. And we get that set up for the position that he's gonna shoot. I'm gonna do a whole nother video on rifle setup from A to B, length of pole, optic, all of that cool stuff. But for now, we're just focusing on mounting this optic. So we've got our eye relief set up, loose. Now we need to make sure our reticle is cant-free. This is a huge discussion, a lot of information out there about it. Now here's where I wanted to show you some tips and tricks that might get you close and in the ballpark without spending a whole bunch of time and money on things like reticle leveling tools and stuff like that. These are great, I still use them, but there's some ways to do this without those tools. Now these are machinist parallels. There's a machinist rule. This is like some Leatherman tool that I just happen to have laying around the shop. So as long as you have something with a little bit of precision, what you can do is you can put this under here and go off of the base and then the flat surface on the bottom of the erector here on the optic, and just make sure that you have good contact between the top surface and the bottom surface, and that'll get you darn close as far as cant-free of your reticle. I'll get into why having your reticle cant-free is important in that other video, but we want to be as cant-free as possible. So that'll get you darn close. In fact, I like to even start there when I'm doing this, and then what I'm going to do is put on the scope level or reticle leveling device. This sits on the barrel and then also sits on the objective. I can torque this guy down now. And it's got a bubble level back here. I've got this in a soft jaw vise. And I'm just going to rotate it until our bubble is nice and level. And then what I've got downrange here is very simply, on one of our ovens, I have a plumb bob with just a piece of white line hanging there. So I get this nice and level. That tells me that the center of my reticle is over the center of bore, which is what we want. We don't want cant like that. Now I can look down here and just, you guys won't be able to see this on camera. I'm going to line this reticle up just like that. And now we have our reticle perfectly plumb or cant-free. At that point, we are going to very carefully and evenly torque this guy down just to where it's not going to want to move anymore. And I'm only using 2 screws. These are ones that I had close. That's it. Now I've already cleaned and degreased all of the threads on the ring and on these screws here. So a little bit of Loctite there. And this, since we're not making contact, the rings are not making contact with each other, we can put the Loctite on those screws, unlike the base. A little tip and trick, guys, if you want to look professional and look like you know what you're doing, make sure that the gaps on both sides of this are even. There's nothing worse than just having, you know, no gap on one side and this massive gap on the other. Like I said, if you're OCD like me, you'll never allow that, but still, let's at least try to look professional, right? And certainly, and what I'm doing here is I'm feeling the gap on both sides, and I'm also holding it in place with an already even gap before I even torque these down, and I could feel the gaps start to close. And just as it does, I know that this screw is making contact. I'll come over here and do the same thing on both sides so that we have a nice even gap. And we're going to pull this guy off and put our Loctite on there because this guy should not be moving now. Loophole is calling for 28 inch-pounds here. So I'm just going to step it up in that X pattern. So I've gone back and forth a few times between the two sets of rings, and we are all torqued. So I did this all nice and evenly. And we are good to go. Now we want to make sure that our reticle did not move. Go back to level here. Perfect. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is how we mount our scope in this particular format. Two-piece base, rings. Hopefully you can kind of follow those same principles if you've got a one-piece base. If you've got something like this that is going on and off multiple different rifles, again, you can just use anything that's precision ground flat or true and make sure that you've got contact all the way across the bottom of both your base and the optic, and that'll get you darn close. This goes on and off multiple different rifles, and I've cross-checked it with the plumb bob and scope leveling tool or reticle leveling tool, and it's pretty darn good. So if you don't have those tools, that's fine. I will put a link in the description to what this tool is, and there are some other options out there as well. They all work pretty good. This one's quick if you've got plumb bob, and I hope that helps a little bit. Hope that saves you a little bit of time, maybe some headache if you're wondering about how to properly mount your optic. So guys, that is pretty much it. Scope mounted up. So kind of to recap here, use good quality components first and foremost. Make sure everything's seated forward, everything's relaxed, you're not inducing stress into anything, don't force anything. And that's pretty much it. If you're looking what to do next on this guy as far as how to get this bore-sighted or zeroed in, I'm gonna be doing a video on that next. I really appreciate you guys watching. If you liked it, go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe if you want to, and hit that notification bell so you know when I post the next video. I appreciate you guys watching. We'll see you on the next one.